Does anybody else have any?
I'll manage it.
So, uh-oh. Well,
I mean, if you want to just leave it, it's up to if Linda's good with it, then
I don't care.
And Dawn, just leave it. Since I'm the third speaker, maybe you can just hook it on then.
okay, but have you worked with these before? Okay, so you know, the,
Oh, I know about that. I worked with a lot of things.
all right, so just the simple on and off switch, and then you can put it in your pocket or on the side there. Testing, testing. That's it for what?
It's set for 7/7. Yeah. Now it's set for 7/5.
I know.
Oh yeah, it works just like this. It's hot. It's really battery. Oh.
Okay, so maybe I'll just leave it on like that.
Well, I just have a couple things. The kids have their birthdays with friends, but I do a family birthday with every family. So I do coming up.
Oh my God.
So I do the cakes and balloons and presents and husbands.
I think you're set.
Thank you.
So it's easier at my house. It's easier in then I can take that silver and 80 where I am. Now this stuff all
Summer sessions. Sorry. Go quickly.
but I want to spend time it's there's some how to train your brain.
And how was it? Justin, 22 years old.
Wes is lovely that he just left and he's special by himself. I would get him. And he said, these two is coming out of his brain.
Just so you know, Chris.
Just to you know.
No hint there.
But the nice Wes and I have but you know, do things together because you want to be separate.
Just like your own.
So I do wrestling and writing and I also and then writing and I myself.
So how many friends do you have? 4.
But you know, when you balance that out. Oh, I guess and mine is kind of into clothes that
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Retirement Without Regret. I'm Robert Hannon for University of Alaska Fairbanks Summer Sessions, and we welcome you to this. Hopefully, a trio of great professionals will allow you to retire regret-free. I like to believe everything should be regret-free, so I'm really rooting for this presentation tonight. I did want to mention a couple things, though, before we begin. Obviously, you know the drill. Make sure your cell phones are turned off. so they don't interfere. And we have a couple of things. If you want to, A, write some questions during the presentation and have them passed down here to ask the presenters during the presentation. There's slips of paper up there with a pen. Also on the front desk out in the foyer, there's another sign-up sheet. If you'd like to be informed about what's happening with summer sessions, there's all sorts of things all summer. And it's often good to get an email alert, so you can sign up for an email alert out on that front desk in the foyer. Let me give you an example of some of the things that will be happening. Tomorrow night, there's the presentation Among Wolves, Gordon Haber's Insights into Alaska's Most Misunderstood Animal. That's Mary Beth Holloman, and she'll be presenting that here at 7 o'clock on Wednesday. Thursday, it's music down at the Jorgensen Botanical Gardens. Lynn Layton and the Loners will be playing some Cajun music, and that'll be fun. And then on Monday, next Monday, this room is well used. Again here at 7 o'clock, there's a presentation by Nat Murphy, a planetarium show. So that should be fun too. So retirement without regret. We have 3 great people here, and every time I talk about them, it cuts out here. So I'm beginning to wonder what's going on. Anyway, Joe Copley, Don Thibodeau, and Linda Holbert will present, and I'd like to first present Linda Holbert. She's a local business owner with offices in both Fairbanks and Anchorage. She moved to Alaska in 1968 and spent most of the next 20 years as an educator, working primarily in adult education. Now for the past 24 years, she's been an agent of New York Life Insurance Company, specializing in estate planning, business development, and charitable giving. So please welcome Linda Holbert.
Well, you hear that I'm associated with New York Life, which means it's a corporation, and corporations need disclaimers. So I have to apologize. In order to be accepted by compliance, I had to just let you know that, let's see, this event is primarily intended to be an audience participation, and that my views don't necessarily represent that of my employer, nor are any of us connected to each other. We're all independent people with our independent views. So now that we've got the disclaimer and the silly stuff over with, we can get to the real worthwhile part. We're going to be handling this in 3 parts with Don, and then I'll handle the middle part, and then Joe. And we'd like to ask you to participate with questions, and we'd like to be able to deal with some particular questions that you have. So if you have some questions, please feel free to write them down, and if we have time, we'll send them forward. We'd like to leave some time at the end of the presentations for questions and interchange, because sometimes that's the best part. So with that, let me introduce Don, and we've edited some. So Don, would you like to come up here and let me introduce him? Don Thibodeau was born and raised in Fairbanks with a family from Rampart. He taught K-12 for 6 years before coming to Denali Center. He's been working in Denali Center for the last 23 years. Don's been on the board of Hospice of Tanana Valley since '91 and continues to be one of the presenters for patient care volunteer training for the Fairbanks Memorial Hospital Hospice Program. In 1998, Don was privileged to receive the Alaska Federation of Natives Presidential Award for Health in recognition of health-related services to our elders. In 2007, the Alaska Alliance for Direct Services Careers named Don as Alaska's Outstanding Direct Service Professional of the Year at the Full Lives Conference in Anchorage. In 2011, Doi Unlimited recognized Don with the Ganaga? Okay, sorry, I'm trying. Community Service Award. Ladies and gentlemen, let's have a warm welcome for Don. Don?
Thank you, Linda. And good evening, everyone. It's good to see all of you here. And someone I know in the community had read in the newspaper that we're doing this presentation. It said retirement. Rushed to my office today and said, Don, I didn't know you were retiring. And so, no, this is not that we're announcing retirement, but that hopefully we can share some insight about how to do so without regret. As you notice on our backgrounds, for those of you who looked at the flyer, we do come from very diverse backgrounds as far as presentations and experiences. And hopefully, over the last 25 years now at Denali Center, I've met literally hundreds and thousands of elders who have shared their stories with me. And someone said, are they horror stories? No, they're just wonderful stories of life that is enriched. And hopefully I can share the part about no regrets. And, when I thought I did a radio shot yesterday with Charlie O'Toole, and I started out by paying honor to the late Alice Ambrose from the village of Hughes. She was born in Alacaca, and Grandma Alice's birthday would have been yesterday, so I thought it would be appropriate to honor her in her memory. And when I think of her as an elder, I think of her sharing the Danake culture with her people, that her children know how to speak the language, they know how to sing the songs, they know how to tan moose hide, they know how to live off of the land. And she shared not only with her children and her grandchildren, but also with the village. She was awarded with the Culture Bearer Award for just her contributions. One time I was getting ready to do a presentation, and it was going to be called Lessons Learned from Our Elders. And so I was telling her about this presentation, and so she asked me, have you learned anything from me? And so I wanted to be careful with my words, and I told her, when I met you, you remind me of Sakanriktana. Her English name was Altona Brown from the village of Ruby. And so I said, it's like you've taught me how to communicate with respect. And so it was just a validation that as we age and as we go through experiences, there's a lot to share. Now, my personal experience in working with elders began when I was 18. My dad had asked me to go and move to his hometown. It was Stone Lake, Wisconsin, a small town not too far from Hayward or Spooner in the northwest area of Wisconsin. I never really met my grandmother, who was 86 at the time, but she had Parkinson's and she needed a full-time caregiver. And so I became that caregiver. And right away, back in those days, Parkinson's wasn't really as well controlled as it is now with medications and treatments. So Grandma shook quite a bit, and she would read the paper, and it would just kind of go flying everywhere. But she got in that walker, and she walked to the kitchen, kind of shaking along, and I would see her, and she started putting flour out and putting different things out. Next thing you know, she was showing me how to knead bread. And I learned how to make breads and pies and all kinds of things from Grandma. And I remember thinking, at 86 years old, and someone that has illness has a lot to teach us. And so I like to encourage people that, as we're thinking of retirement, sometimes it isn't really about how well we are set financially. It may be many other things. We want to be including that whole package. So that's kind of my little part of today's presentation. Another person who's inspired me is the traditional chief of Fort Yukon. His name is Simon. Simon Francis had lived in Fairbanks for a while his wife lived with us at Denali Center. And I remember him telling me stories and watching him as he would share with the facility. We're a nursing facility at Denali Center, so we provide nursing care. And here Mr. Francis would come with traditional healing that addressed pain and stuff like that. He knew how to go to the woods and get these things and bring them in. And of course, the physicians were welcome to have him bring his treatment in, because that was what was going to help his wife. So he would do that, and he would teach us about that. He also taught us a lot about love and devotion. And everyone would used to admire this man who would come in and just be there all the time. One thing he was telling me about, Don, I built my first house when I was 17. And he was talking about how he raised his family in that home. And then he said, I built my second house when I was 81. And he showed me pictures of his house along the river and how he had built that home. And I thought, how neat that in his 80s he's doing things like that. Traditional chiefs in this area, Chief Andrew Isaac, for those that knew him or if you didn't know him, Chief Peter John, Chief David Salmon. These men were quite incredible men in terms of, in their senior years, what would be considered retirement age, they were very busy forging ahead and leading Native organizations. They were developing people. They were bringing people together as far as like tribes and stuff like that. In the history of Alaska, for those that do not know, there are separate groups of Athabascans, separate groups of Inupiat, Eskimo peoples that didn't always get along traditionally. And so these men are really leaders in their time of bringing us all together for really common purposes. But in addition to that, individually, they were incredibly spiritual men. Also, another part of the history of Alaska is that religions had moved into Alaska, and many different, from wherever you go geographically within the state, you'll see that there were certain churches that were like predominant churches in those areas. Well, these men, Reverend Salmon actually was a priest with the Episcopal Church, but they were very strong in their religious beliefs and shared traditional and religious aspects as far as leadership. It was incredible to watch their strength in their leadership. And also, and I could really, I shouldn't mention too many more people because really there are so many elders who have just enriched so many lives just through living and sharing and teaching. I don't know if anyone knows Mr. and Mrs. Jim and Sandy Crabb from Central. They had operated an establishment there, Crabb's Corner, for many years. I asked Sandy if I could share her story, and she gave me permission to do so. Sandy had a stroke and is now actually living at Denali Center. What is incredible about them is that they go about seeing how they can enrich the lives of everybody else at Denali Center. And they make every day worth living and kind of exciting and just share their stories. Sandy writes an article in our facility newsletter that's called Life and Times of Sandy Crabb. And so she's sharing her exciting stories about what had happened. Well, recently Sandy had a major medical event. She was planning to go to 4th of July up in Central, and I don't know if anyone's been up there during the holiday, but they have like a parade and all kinds of fanfare that's going on and dances and just an exciting time. And they were unable to go this year. And sure enough, come Thursday, the day before 4th of July, everyone's hustling and bustling about. They're decorating all the wheelchairs at Denali Center, red, white, and blue. And next thing you know, on the 4th, Denali Center has its own parade. Again, I'm thinking of living a life in spite of our situation without regret. Sometimes people tell me that there are regrets. Out of the many, many elders that I've met, I would say there are few that really give lamenting stories, those horror stories that someone asked about as far as, retirement years. But sometimes, naturally, what might be a regret is our health. We didn't take care of our health. So as we're thinking about the financial planning and the preparations for retirement, you do want to be thinking about your health. And people who've told me, well, I really shouldn't have been smoking like I did all those years, or that drinking sure caught up to me, or whatever, or I should have been really more attentive to my diet because I let that diabetes go way out of control, and I resulted in this and that issue. So certainly, thinking about health, healthy living. Thank you for this Healthy Living series because it's just getting our minds thinking about what can I do to be active in promoting my wellness. Another thing that I hear people say sometimes is about family. Their family dynamics, that somehow along the line they had allowed some estrangement to come. And they weren't really as connected with a son or a daughter, and they really couldn't communicate at this stage of their life. And just wishing that in some way they had learned either to forgive or they could forgive them or something happened. And sometimes it's a spiritual issue. One of the ladies I met before, we were talking about, her pain issues, we were talking about her medical needs and just going about what all the things that she would need for her wellness and really for her last days. And she said, the only thing I need is love and forgiveness. She was talking about spiritual needs. And so sometimes it is good to really think ahead. What are your values? What are your spiritual beliefs? And do you need to do what's necessary so that later on you're not living with those concerns? I asked some elders, their advice about this presentation. And one of them thought immediately about finances and said, don't give your kids any money. They won't pay you back. Well, I will share a quick story about a brother and a sister. This particular brother, they both had left their hometown and moved. One moved north here to Fairbanks, and the other moved to California. And they went about raising their families. The man had worked for himself. He was self-employed, and any money that he made, he really put back into the business, invested into the business, and then raised his family. And as you can imagine, that took quite a bit of whatever resources he had, and that's what he concentrated on. Really not thinking ahead to when he would retire. Then during pipeline years, he got a job with the union. Wasn't really paying attention to dates, when pensions are in effect and stuff like that, and end up quitting that job before those retirement could kick in. So then when it did become his time that he was going to retire, he was left with whatever Social Security was going to provide. So just not a whole lot of income in his retirement years. So in a way, there's some regret that, wow, you should have really been paying attention to some of those issues. He lived to be 86 and did pretty well actually with his purchases along the way, that he was able to support himself and enjoy life, and actually had a retirement in a sunny area and enjoyed going back and forth. He did the snowbird thing that people enjoy doing, but not a lot of extra money. His sister, on the other hand, loved her work and worked until she was 86 herself. And she's 102 now. And she lives in her own home and, goes outdoors to check the paper. And the neighbors kind of watch as she takes her garbage out to the road every day, or once a week, that is. And she goes to the mailbox to check her mail and just lives her life. And at 102, she really doesn't have a lot of financial needs. And she actually makes quite a bit of retirement because she worked all those years. So she doesn't really have a need for anything. So just interesting how different dynamics can work with different people. And I guess our stories will be that things are very individual. Now, what did happen is, I mentioned about someone who came and asked me if I was retiring. Someone else sent me an email. Don, do you know anything about long-term care insurance? Wow, how timely. They send this on 4th of July, by the way. I need to look into it, but not sure where to start. Do you know what kind is the best to have if a person ended up in the Denali Center? So they had it right that that's where I work, and that's kind of what I do. So maybe one can speak in different areas about this, and as Linda said in the disclaimer, we may not all at all have the same opinion. But in paying for long-term care, for those that think that maybe a health situation could occur, and certainly it could occur to any one of us, an accident could occur to any one of us, and we're looking at life perhaps in a facility, an assisted living or a nursing facility, that can be extremely expensive. So how the Medicare reimbursement rate in Alaska works, in the city of Anchorage, where there's a lot of people, lots of facilities, that daily rate for a nursing facility may be $400 to $500, somewhere in there. Now, somewhere in like Cordova or Nome or other places like that where it's more isolated, it could be $700 to $800 a daily rate that you're paying. So if you're paying into a long-term care insurance and their payment when it comes time for you to live in a facility is going to be $150 per day or $250 per day, whatever that rate is going to be, that's going to be far less than what is charged here in the state of Alaska. And so people are thinking, wow, that's, even though I'm paying all this into it, it's not going to cover my needs. So we might be thinking ahead to how will I make up that difference if that is the type of care I'm going to need at some point. And certainly those rates change if you are in an assisted living facility versus a skilled nursing facility that offers like therapy services and things like that. For those that are going in for short-term stay, this is the most common stay at a nursing facility. So someone's there like for maybe a hip injury. They had a fall and had a fracture, and so they had a surgery. And they're going to be there for maybe 2 to 3 weeks for a rehab type stay for nursing care and rehab. That's usually paid for a senior who has Medicare. That's a 100% payment there. If they're there, or maybe their therapy is going to take like 6 weeks or a little bit longer, then Medicare will pay 85%, and then if you have another insurance somewhere, usually that secondary insurance covers the other 15% for up to like 100 days. Sometimes though, someone has like maybe a fairly good retirement, it's over like the Medicaid limit, public assistance limits that would be required, and but they're going to need long-term care. They, in fact, will not be able to be released from a facility because of all of the care that they're going to need over time. And so sometimes they are seeking an attorney, and they're setting up a Miller Trust that could help them to sort of lock in their assets in a trust situation so that they then can be deemed eligible for Medicaid coverage. So there are different ways that could be paid out. Just to encourage that, it's not always one plan that's actually going to take care of the situation. We may be thinking of what are the alternate things. I just noticed that my time is up, and it's time to turn it over to Linda. But thank you very much.
Perhaps you can ask some questions later, because
Yes.
I'm sure long-term care is a major issue for a lot of people who are here this evening. So I'd like to talk a little bit, I guess my part is a little bit more about retirement and retiring without regret and some of the pitfalls that we see in retirement, and then some of the things that are changing about planning for retirement today. And things are really changing. Where many people had retirement plans that were defined benefit plans, you work for 30 years, you get this much, that's getting to be more and more rare, and we're now more of a defined contribution plan where you put money in and you build money up. But the question with that today is you build a bucket of, pardon me, I'm the party. I thought I turned it off. I will tell you this one.
Say hi.
And I want to tell you this is my 95-year-old mother. So I know a little bit about long-term care, too. I have a 95-year-old mom who lives on her own in a condo near me, but I assume major responsibility for taking care of her. So she knew I had a presentation tonight, but she forgot. So she's calling to ask me, where are you? Why aren't you home? Lessons we all learn. So one of the pitfalls to retirement is unexpected illness or injury. And I do this a lot professionally. I work in the field of insurance where I try to help provide people and plan for disability insurance, health insurance, those kinds of things. But I've had a lot of clients who've had unexpected illnesses interrupt their plans for retirement. One of the things that I think people need to look at as you assess planning for retirement and retirement without regret is what kind of risks have I got covered and what kind of risk level am I comfortable with? If something happens, do I have some of those issues prepared for? Do I have disability insurance? Do I have adequate health insurance? Those are all part of planning, so that if you do have those coverages, you are somewhat protected, but it's really important. One of the other things is lack of discipline or lack of financial management. One of the things we try to teach our kids is how to handle money. And so one of the things that we really want to work with is how to handle our money well and how to help our kids and our other family members learn to handle their money well so we don't necessarily become responsible for them as well. But I think that's really important. Excessive spending, that's another thing that kind of blocks pitfalls to retirement. I want to talk about some of the things that have changed. We're talking about somebody who's 102. My mom is 95. My mom's lived way longer than her mother, way longer than her sister, longer than any of the other relatives in her family. And she's going strong at 95. So what does that mean for longevity for us planning today? How do we plan for the future? We don't know if we're going to be one of the fortunate few or the fortunate many these days who make it to 100. So one of the things we have to do today is we get to 65 and we retire, and then we may have 40, 45 years, longer than we worked, to plan for retirement. And to retire and to enjoy ourselves, to contribute to our communities, to contribute to our families, to make life better for other people, to enjoy life. And so planning, it just takes a lot of planning to think about the fact that societally today we have a lot longer retirement to look forward to, but also to plan for. So how we plan for that, by using what's available through our work and our employers, how we take a look at taxation and try to save as much taxes as we can, how we can plan for the future. That's really important. So longevity is one of the biggest issues today. The other issue is lifestyle. What kind of lifestyle do we want to lead while we're in our working years, and what kind of lifestyle do we want to have in retirement? Are we happy downsizing? Do we not want to downsize? Do we want to be able to go outside during the winters if we want to, or stay here? Do we want to visit with a lot of folks? What kind of lifestyle do we want? And that involves planning too, and foresight. You know, I want to do this. No, I don't want to do that. I always want to stay here. My kids are here. But planning too. So you want to look at longevity, and you want to look at lifestyle. The other thing I think you want to look at is legacy. What kind of legacy do you want to leave for the community and for your family? Do you want to leave money for your children? How do you want to leave it? And it's really appropriate, and I'm so glad that Joe's here tonight, because she's going to cover some of those issues which are really important to us. Many of us want to make the world a better place and leave money to the university or to schools, sort of things we care about. Other one of us want to secure our children or grandchildren or education or a variety of different things. So there's a lot of different things to think about as we look towards retirement without regret. If we say this is the kind of lifestyle we want to lead, then we want to say, how can we carefully plan to get there? How do we want to plan our working lives so that we can get where we want to go at the time we want to go there? That's important. It's important to take a look at our risk tolerance and how risky do you want to be. I mean, as you are younger, you can afford to perhaps take more risk. But I meet a lot of young people who don't necessarily want to take risk. I meet a lot of older people or people who've been in business and they've taken risk all their lives with their businesses. But one of the things to assess is, what is my comfort level with risk? Am I comfortable with risk? Do I want to feel safe? Those are all important things so that when you get to retirement, you're comfortable with where you are. One of the things to take a look at, and what I look at with a lot of the people that I deal with every day, is what of my assets are protected. You know, there are court suits, there are car accidents, that people get sued, people lose money, people get divorces. I mean, how do you protect the assets that you've got? And those are some things that are on people's mind today, is how do I protect what I have? How do I make what I have grow? What risks do I want to take with what I have? So those are all pieces that are coming to play. And nothing is static. Nothing's the way it used to be. Everything is changing. I'm looking at myself, and I'm over 65, and I'm still working, and I have no intention to stop working. I love it. It's fun. I have a lot of my associates and friends who are working well behind what we consider retirement years. And they enjoy it. They like it. So when you say, I'm going to retire at 65, or I'm going to retire at 62, you know, maybe you will, and maybe you'll say, gee, I don't necessarily want to do that. I want to work longer. Or I may not want to do what I'm doing now, but I want to do something else. I find a lot of people retire from jobs where they have defined pension plans, and then they say, I've always dreamed about doing X. They go back to school, they start a business. So today, I find that a lot of people are working in the workforce a great deal longer than they were in the past. So I would say that's another trend that's changing in the society today, is people not retiring at an age. I mean, right now, it used to be 65, now it's 67. But a lot of people are waiting to collect Social Security till they're 70. So one of the things to do is to take a look at what it is you want to do. Do you want to have a second career after your first one? Those are all things where if you do decide to retire, you retire without regret. If you don't decide to retire and you decide to continue working, then you're working because you want to, not because you have to. And that's the joy of it too, is making those kinds of plans. I'm just trying to think, there's no time to go into a lot of specifics. We just have a general touch here. So if there's something in particular that you want to any of us, ask us questions, and please write them down. I really want to make sure that we leave lots of time for Joe, because Joe has got a lot of important information. And I'm going to guess that a goodly number of people who are here tonight are really interested in wills and trusts, in planning, in wanting to know what they should do or how they should do it, in healthcare directives. I think in any one topic, we could spend a lot of time. So we're just touching on a few things. One of the things that it was pointed out to me is if there are issues that you'd like to know more about, if you could let us know, perhaps next summer, they could plan some sessions around those particular issues that you think we should deal more with and in detail. I think I would like to end by introducing Joe, but just saying that retirement without regret means a retirement that you've defined what you want, that you've planned for it, and that you're prepared emotionally and financially and hopefully legally to make happen what you want to do. That's why it kind of makes sense to have all of us here, because whatever we do, we lead to that. So let me introduce Joe Kuechly, and I'm going to read, if I may. Joe Kuechly is a shareholder in the law firm of Cook, Schumann & Grosclose. She graduated from the University of the Pacific, McGeorge School of Law with her JD in '86 and with her LLM in taxation, which is a master's, in '87. Her practice areas are estate planning, real estate, commercial law, corporations, and probate. She's a member of the American, Alaskan, and Tanana Valley Bar Associations. She's a frequent speaker on estate planning and business formation. She's married to former state representative and state senator Jean Theriault, and they have 2 children. She's a member of the Rotary Club of Fairbanks, most recently serving as the club president, which is an exhausting job. Thank you, Joe. During the 2013-2014 year. As part of her Rotary service, she went on a Rotoblast mission to Udaipur, India, is that correct? In April of 2011 to assist the medical team with repair of cleft lips and cleft palates. For fun, she and her family love to travel internationally. She has ridden a camel in India and an elephant in Thailand. So her life is complete. Joe likes to sing, watch movies, go to amusement parks, play games, read, and drink really good, but not necessarily very expensive wine. Joe, thank you.
Gee, I didn't know it was going to be this horrible build-up to me. You guys didn't tell me that when we met to play this. I've been snookered. It's great to be here this evening, and so my goal, besides hooking this thing onto my skirt, very good. My goal is to basically talk about estate planning a little bit. I did bring some pamphlets or some packets. I don't know that I had enough. So if you're married and your spouse is here, if you could share, that would be great. But you're welcome to have that. Every slide that's up here is in your packet. So you don't have to write down everything I've said because you'll have it there. I think a big part of retiring in any situation is understanding what's going to happen when you become disabled, if that happens, or incapacitated. I'm going to talk about that a little bit at the end. And also what's going to happen to your stuff. I find a lot of my clients are really concerned about what's going to happen to my family. And really, estate planning is something that you do for them. I am not a financial planner, so I'm not going to talk about how much you need to invest to, have a rate of return on your retirement. If that's what you want, write that down, and they'll plan that for next summer, because that's not my area. So if that's what you were looking for, write it down for next year. hold off retirement one more year until we get that information. I suppose that's the best bet. But there's a lot of misunderstandings about what happens when people die. And so I want to dispel some of those misunderstandings so that you know what will happen to your stuff when you die. And a lot of the things, there's a misunderstanding of what happens at death to property and how things pass. And a lot of people think, well, it's all in the will. Well, not necessarily. So we're going to talk about how property passes by operation of law, how it passes through probate, and how it can pass through trusts, both inter vivos and testamentary. And operation of law is really the most misunderstood aspect of what happens at death to your stuff. As I say, people always think it's the will. It's all revolves around the will. And sometimes it really doesn't revolve around the will. It revolves around how you own your stuff. So how many of you here are married and own a home together? I showed you, it's quite a few of you. Probably when you bought that home, there were some little words in your deed that you had no idea what it meant. And that's tenancy by the entirety. And I challenge you to go home and pull out your deed and look for those words, and undoubtedly they will be there. And what that means is the second the first spouse dies, the survivor is going to get that piece of real estate. It's unique in Alaska to married people. Only married people, legally married people, we don't have common law marriage, in Alaska, does this happen with. And so I have a lot of misunderstandings with clients who think, well, I know, I'll put my kid's name on the house, and when I die, it will go to them. Most states allow that. Alaska does not. We are a minority jurisdiction in the United States of America. So go home, look at your real property deeds, and think about that. Because that simply means, by operation of law, the way you own it determines who's going to get that piece of property. Now, many of you are out there saying, well, of course I can own property with my child. And of course you can. But what happens is, or I'll use Linda and I, if Linda and I own a piece of real property together, we're not married to each other. If Linda dies first, her estate will have that 1/2 interest in the property, and I will own the other 1/2. Her 1/2 interest will have to go through probate. Now think about that for a minute. What if I don't like her kids? I'm going to end up owning a piece of property with them. That could be very difficult. In this day and age, with folks in domestic partnerships, this is a huge issue. If you're going to live together and buy a piece of property together, invest in that piece of property, do you, if you're the survivor, want to end up owning that piece of property with? Often the answer is no. So you need to think about how we're going to deal with that. Now in Alaska, this is just, if you wonder, does she keep up with the law? You're going to be able to check that box off. Effective July 21st of this month, that is a scant how many days away, 13 days away, you can do something now in Alaska called a transfer on death deed, where you can say in a deed, I want to leave my real property to my child, or to my new best friend, jokingly. Feel free to add my name. As long as it's not contaminated. So you can do that effective July 21st, brand new, but you have to do that on the deed. That requires you to change something, which sometimes is difficult. But in any event, that's hot off the press. Now, some of you may be saying, but Joe, I have a joint bank account. That's true. A bank account you can have. Linda and I could have a bank account together, and I would be really happy, Linda, with that, just so you know. Because I know what she makes as a life estate person or a life insurance person is much more than me. So I would love to have a bank account with Linda. And then if she died first, everything in that would come to me if it was with rights to survivorship. But that's not real property. That's personal property under the law. Okay? So just understanding how you have your accounts open. I have had the case in my office, and I only will tell a few war stories, where the children came to me after mom died, and the children were in their 60s and 70s. Let's just make sure that's clear. And there was 3 girls and 1 boy, who we dubbed the evil brother. And so the 3 good sisters in their 60s came to me and said, Mom died. My condolences. Mom had set up a bank account with, you got it, Evil Son. Because Evil Son paid her bills for her. But that account had grown to $80,000 on her death. Mom's will said divide by 4, share with all my children. And the girls, the daughters, the good daughters said to me, he should share. Make him share. I said, I can't make him share. When Mom set up that bank account and named Evil Brother as the joint tenant with rights of survivorship, the law presumes she meant what she set up. And that is, at death, he got it. So yes, he got $80,000 more than his 3 sisters, and they were crabby, and I am sure that he was never invited again for Thanksgiving dinner, but that's the sad result. So know the limits on what you're setting up when you set it up, because there's consequences. There's a bunch of other things I've listed up here that have beneficiary designations. The number one mistake people make is not understanding who they name as the beneficiary. I always tell my clients, you could come into me today and I could write a will for you that says, leave my New York life insurance policy to my new best friend, Joe Cooley. But if that isn't what the beneficiary designation form that Linda's filled out for you says, I'm not going to get it, sadly. I'm not get it. It's going to go to whomever you name. We've had the case in the office where man dies. He was in his second marriage. But guess who was named the beneficiary on the life insurance policy? First wife. That leads to some extreme crabbiness, shall we say. So we were able to get it resolved, but not without paying a lawyer, and we're really happy to be paid. But if you want to avoid paying a lawyer, you got to do a little bit of planning. And sometimes you need to pay a lawyer because the old adage, you can pay me now or pay me later, is never more true than when somebody dies. Pensions, life insurance policy, 401 quick pays all have beneficiary designations. You need to check them, both your primary and your contingent beneficiary designations. This is very important between spouses, very important if you've had children. I find as people age, they care about their grandchildren. They're like, I don't care about my kids anymore. They don't have any sense by now. They care about their grandkids. They care about the grandkids. The kids are out. Who cares? But it's important to have those beneficiary designations right because that's who's going to get them. So I already talked about all that. So there you go. Those beneficiary designations, check to make sure that they are right. Now, probate. Probate has a really, really bad rep, and I'm not sure it deserves it. You can go into probate 2 ways. One is intestate, which means no will. The state of Alaska will write you a will if you have not bothered to write a will. So the question is, will you like the will that the state of Alaska has written for you? I can tell you in most cases the answer is no. The question is, who have you left behind? This gets very sticky if you were in a second or a third marriage. If you have multiple past spouses and children from different marriages, it all gets very complex. I actually have to go back to the statute every time. I'm like, okay, where are we at here? Because it can be very, very difficult. So you want to make sure that you look at that and are happy. The best way, of course, is to go in testate, because then you get a control. And what I've learned as a lawyer for 27 years is all of my clients are control freaks. I'm a control freak. We all want to decide who gets our stuff and who's going to be in control. So you want to have a will. You want to be able to name your personal representative. That's going to be the person who's going to decide stuff. And you get to decide who gets my stuff. I love this question. I get it all the time. Do I need a lawyer to write a will? And my answer is, you get what you pay for. The technical answer is, you do not. But wow, if you don't. And the horror stories I can tell, but in the next 15 minutes, so much more to cover than that. What is the number one reason to do a will? What do you think is the number one reason to do a will? Yes. Who said it? Good. Were you cheating?
I did one of your presentations.
Uh-oh, I must not have done a good job because you're back. It is true. It's kids. Sometimes we get all involved in the financial aspects, but I can tell you the number one reason, and if you have minor children or children who have children and you care about who's going to get your grandkids, encourage them to name it and name somebody in a will. It's so important to do that. We get all caught up in taxes and who gets stuff, but sometimes we forget the people. And I always put this in here to remind people children are very important. And having that, particularly in the unlikely event that both parents are in a car accident or the like, is very important. Okay. Living trusts is another way that property can pass, and this is the probate avoidance mechanism. You can actually put everything you own into a trust. You can be the trustee of the trust through your lifetime, and then at death, that trust can name who's going to be the successor trustee to take care of your stuff, and it can also then name who's going to get your things. This is a really great method to avoid probate if you own property in another state. If you're somebody who has that retirement home in Arizona or Hawaii or pick other sunny place, the laws of that state are going to decide who gets your stuff at death, who gets that asset at death. Even if you die here and Alaska is your main probate, I mean, when you think about it, it makes total sense. An Alaska court can't tell Hawaii who gets to own Hawaii real estate. It makes sense when you think about it. But if you don't have some sort of trust or other mechanism, what's going to happen is you're going to not only have a probate in Alaska, you'll have a probate in whatever state you own real estate in. Well, I have clients who have a house in Arizona, a condo in Hawaii, you name it, and sometimes you can end up doing probates all over the country. Some states it's really easy. Texas was a breeze. Hawaii was a nightmare. I mean, it just is very much dependent on where you have real estate. So a living trust is a way to avoid that. Back when I started practicing law, there was a really famous book about avoiding probate. And this is really the secret, is to do a trust. And so how do they work? I have many clients who say, well, my mom did a trust, or my dad did a trust. And they say to me, like, I should know what that means. Well, I do know what it means. Every trust has the common elements that we're going to talk about in just a minute. But then they'll say to me, well, do you need to read the trust? Yes. It's 20 pages long. I have to pay you to read it? Yes, you do. Because I'm not going to read it if you don't. Because trusts are just like hammer, to me as a lawyer, trusts are like a hammer and nails to a carpenter. A carpenter with hammer and nails can build lots of different things. I, as a lawyer, and a lawyer anywhere else in the country, can do lots of different things with a trust. The question is, what's your goal by doing it? Until I read it, I don't know what kind of trust it is. But I do know it has these common elements. You can set up a trust during life or at death. And if you're the person who sets it up, you're either called the trustor, settlor, or grantor. I call them the or person. You transfer assets to somebody called the trustee. During your lifetime, that can be you. It can be another person. Sometimes if we have a couple or we have a family where we have a disabled person in their family, or we know one spouse has got a degenerative disease, we can put stuff into a trust so that they're cared for through their lifetimes and name somebody else as a trustee. That person, the trustee, holds the assets for a person called the beneficiary. And the beneficiary can be yourself during your lifetime. At death, it can be your children or grandchildren or charities or whoever you want it to be. You can, the trust always has something called a corpus, or we kind of compare that to a principal. That's the main stuff you put in the trust, whether you put it in at life or put it in at death. And you can do a trust during life or at death. It depends on when you want. And that trust then earns interest, and we call that the income interest off of a trust. All trusts have these common elements, but how they are going to function and what goal they have depends on what was set up. I can tell you the most common trust I set up as an estate planner is for minor children, because most people don't want. Well, under the law, minors cannot own property. So if both parents die, leaving a minor child, They have to do a court-ordered conservatorship, meaning they get the money at 18. Think about yourself at 18. Yeah, I would say that reaction. No one can handle money well at 18. It's the rarity. So most parents want some sort of trust so that at the death of the second of them, at death, they set it up. They're the Grantor Trust where they pass money to a trustee, often a trusted family member, who holds that money for the beneficiary or beneficiaries who are their children. That's the most common trust, but it's not the only trust that we do. So for doing planning, one of the things that I'm asking my clients is, what are your goals being here? And what are you trying to accomplish? What are the things that you're concerned about? What have you got? You know, do you have properties in multiple states? Then I need to think about that. Do we have somebody in your family who's either a special needs person of some kind? Do we have a child or a grandchild? Do we have terminal illness in your family? Do we have mental illness in your family? What are we dealing with? Because it's only if I know what we're dealing with that I can give you good advice. Okay, so how many of you have a will or some sort of estate plan as we sit here today? Okay, a good number of you. One thing that's really important is to check it. I can tell you it's not fun as a lawyer to probate a will that's 25 years old that nobody's looked at in a while, because that's when people go, oh my gosh, that person's dead, it's just kind of wasted opportunities. So make sure for non-tax reasons that you make sure you still like everybody you named. And that may sound obvious, but you'd be shocked. Ron's up there laughing. It's true, you know. So it's like, oh, that person was divorced from my child. I don't want them handling my estate. You still like everybody. Of course, there's tax reasons. The exemption is $5.34 million. There are valuation discounts, generation skipping issues, and of course, we really don't know what Congress and the President are going to do in the future. We never know what's going to happen, so it's always good to do a little checkup now and then to make sure that your will and your trust is what you want to do. The estate tax is something that's really important to look at. We have a scant 9 minutes left, but I always tell my clients when I meet with them, the estate tax makes income tax look like kid stuff. So for those of you who aren't familiar, you've been thinking, well, I've paid income taxes all my life, and that's true, but the federal government doesn't really care about that. Let me just clue you in. If you die with an estate of over $5.34 million, you also get to pay an estate tax. The lowest marginal estate tax rate is 37%, and it quickly goes up to 39% and 40%. So, and you may be thinking, oh, well, I don't have nearly that much. But look at this list of assets that the estate tax touches. It is everything that you own. The estate tax includes your death benefit on your life insurance policies. It includes your 401k. It includes your business. And when often people sit down and start thinking about it, it's not hard to get higher than you think. The old adage, I work more dead than alive, is totally true. Because we don't care about net worth. It's about what do you own on the date of death and what is its value. And if its value is over that threshold, then you can have an estate tax problem, and your estate tax return is due 9 months after the date of death. And I can tell you that comes up really quickly. And then I have my clients, when I tell them that, they say, I know, I'll give it all away. And I say, the government's got that figured out too. So let's talk about that a little bit. Because gifts are taxed at the same rate. The gift tax rates are the same as the estate tax rates. So you have to file a gift tax return. If you are a donor and you give away, and if it exceeds $14,000 per year per person. Now, a great gift tax plan, you can give up to $14,000 per year in stuff. It doesn't just have to be cash. To any number of people, I always tell my clients you can give up to $14,000 per year to everyone in Fairbanks. You will guarantee a lot of people at your funeral. You'll have a lot of friends, and that's cheap and easy estate planning, but it means you have to part with your stuff. So that's the downside. But in any event, gift taxes are out there too, so if you're thinking I'll give it away, there you go. Now, for those of you who are married to a U.S. citizen, you get some other little benefit, and that's the unlimited marital deduction. I'm always surprised how many non-U.S. citizens there are in Fairbanks. I run across them all the time, and some of them are very cleverly disguised. And you know who I'm talking about. Canadians. They sound like us, they look like us, they don't have an accent unless they say A or house and out, and then I get a clue. But I ask people, and if you've seen in the packet in our Will Information Form, I have asked about your citizenry, and they say, is she from the Department of Homeland Security? No, but it matters from an estate planning point of view, because if you are not a U.S. citizen or your spouse is not a U.S. citizen, you may not get all of these tax benefits. That's a whole nother bubble on, like, if you were doing a drop-down menu and planning, we could talk an hour about that, so we won't. But suffice it to say, if you have a non-U.S. citizen in your family, you've got issues to think about. But between U.S. citizen spouses, you get something called the unlimited marital deduction. I always tell my beloved husband, Gene, if I had millions of dollars and I left them all to him, he would be really happy, and there would be no estate tax owed at his death, or at my death, which would be a beautiful thing. But of course, I'm going to die after him, so he'll be leaving me his millions. It's now $5.34 million. As I said, this is the Taxpayer Relief Act that came in on January 1st, 2013, that changed that. This is really part of the issue, of course. All of these issues are one of the forefronts why we're dealing with the whole same-sex marriage issue. This is some of the benefits. This is some of the issues why marriage is so important. Because domestic partners don't get the benefits that I just described. So think about that when you're looking at, the whole political and social debate. This is some of the real hardcore issues, the financial issues that are at stake, and why it's become such a hot topic, or among many reasons why it's become a hot topic. Just as an example, if we had somebody die in 2013, and in 2013, the tax rate or the amount you could die with was $5.25 million. If you see at the first death, and I always kill off my husband's first because usually they die first, so that's actuarially the case. And if we had an $11 million combined estate, on the death of the first spouse, they would have a $5.5 million estate. The unlimited marital deduction would mean their taxable estate is zero. But what happens then at the death of the second spouse is a bit frightening, because now the surviving spouse has an $11 million estate, unless he or she has married a much younger person, which I always advocate, just to get that marital deduction. They have now only, in 2013, $5.25 million, and they had a taxable estate of $5,750,000, and at a 40% rate. That's $2.3 million they get to pay in estate taxes. That's not a typo. That's a fact. I've had that happen to some of my clients. 20 years ago, the amount we could all die with was $600,000, and I watched a family on the death of their mother write a check. Think about that, $600,000. That's not very much. She had about $1 million estate, $1.2 million, which I don't think is Rockefeller wealthy. She had two very valuable pieces of real property, one of them on Lake Union in Washington. The 706 estate tax return requires us to get appraised values, not tax assessed values. The IRS really doesn't care what your local government, the borough or county, thinks something's worth. And every time the appraisal came in, it was like, oh my gosh, pushed him into a higher rate. And then she owned property right here in Fairbanks on the river, a significant amount of it. Her family wrote a check for $245,000 9 months after her date of death. So this is real money. This isn't like play money. One nice thing that the Tax Act did, though, in 2013 is we have something new in our tax arsenal that we never had, and that's portability. That fancy word, all that means is that if the first spouse dies and hasn't used all of their unified credit, the surviving spouse gets it. In order to preserve that, all we have to do is file a 706, the state tax return at the death of the first spouse. I am finding this useful in some shocking situations. I recently had a client, very young woman, her husband died, and she was very young, and they had actually done pretty well for themselves. And I thought, wow, do I really want to file? There was no on the surface need to file an estate tax return, but we did, because we wanted to preserve the portability, the unified credit amount at her death, because she was very young and said, I don't know what this estate will grow to by the time she's 75 or 80. She's only 30 right now. So that estate could be whomping. That's a highly technical legal term, by the way, whomping, and we want to make sure we can protect it. So we file a 706 9 months from the date of death, so that's how we preserve that. So that's some of the reasons we file an estate tax return. One is, of course, to preserve portability, to save the unified credit. And the other is step up in basis. So I've been talking a lot about estate taxes, and I'm going to talk a little bit about income taxes. Step up in basis is an income tax consequence. And sometimes I have the question from my clients, should I give it away or should I die with it? This is what we look at. I don't know the answer to that question until we look at it. So in this example, the deceased dies owning Google stock and wants to give it. Now, I know that Google stock's worth a lot more. Add zeros till it's significant, but for the sake of discussion, I like my numbers to be simple. So if my person wants to give it away, and if the recipient of that gift then sells it, if I give my Google stock to Linda, Linda gets the same income tax basis in it than I have. So if I bought it for $1, she's going to have the same basis in it in $1. And if she then goes and sells it for $10, she's going to have a capital gain of $9. Look at the difference if I leave it to her at death. If I leave Linda my one share of Google stock that's worth $10 and she sells it the day after I die, she gets, under the income tax laws, a step up in basis to date of death value. It's huge from an income tax point of view. You think about people in this town who own the Harding Lake cabin, the Birch Lake cabin, the property out in Name River that is significant to you that they bought in 1950. It's worth a lot more today. So should they leave the Harding Lake cabin to them, or should they gift it to them now? That could run counter to all of the Medicaid planning, all those issues that come in. So you have to look at that. But this is often a prime issue to look at, is what are we going to face on that. We do have elective community property in Alaska that if spouses elect it, we can get a full step up in both assets, both sides. So reducing the estate, we have our $14,000 per year. You can do lots of things with life insurance. I see it's 8 o'clock. You can give gifts to charity. We have lots of great charitable giving options in this town. I would be remiss with Ron here and myself if we didn't talk about the Golden Heart Community Foundation, the University Foundation, all kinds of things, lots of different things you can do on charitable giving. There are assets with income tax issues. Chief among them, just to mention briefly, are IRAs and deferred compensation accounts. Many people have IRAs and they think, yay, they're income tax deferred, but what they're thinking in their head is income tax exempt. That's a wrong answer. It's deferred until either death or until you reach your retired minimum beginning date, which is 71 and a half. Only the federal government and 5-year-olds care about half birthdays, but they do. I don't know why 70 and a half was picked as the age, but it was, so there you go. Just keep that in mind. But if you have issues with income tax deferral, there's some strategies we can have to work on that. So I'm not going to talk about this very much, but you can read the slide and it's in your packet. So what do? Don't get bogged down. Just get started. If you haven't done an estate plan or haven't looked at things recently, make an appointment, fill out in your packets. I have a sheet whether any attorney worth their salt is going to need that information. I can spend a lot of time and money with a client going over things like how do you spell Jordan's name. I have a daughter, Jordan, and we cursed her with a Jordyn. So, you know, I can spend a lot of time and money figuring that out. But getting that information down saves you ultimately a lot of money and a lot of time. One thing I definitely want to talk about I know I'm a little over, but it's so critical. You really do your estate planning for your family, as I said, but for you sitting in this room, if you don't have an Alaska Healthcare Directive, you are setting yourself up for failure. Because you will still be alive. The number one myth is, if anything happens and you're incapacitated, the number one myth people believe is, well, I have a will and I named so-and-so as my personal representative, they'll take care of it. That is incorrect. Personal representatives only have authority when you are dead. Death certificate, dead. If you're in a car accident and breathing, you're alive. That person will have no authority to make a decision over you. I have recently, in my own office, had an elderly gentleman that had no one. His mother was alive, but in no condition to take care of him. He had a major health incident. Adult Protective Services got involved. They put a guardianship on him. He recovered. It's really hard once the state of Alaska is involved to extricate yourself from their care and from their control. So the number one thing we did for him once he got well, and we extricated him at no inexpensive amount of money, I might add, we did a healthcare directive for him and a power of attorney. They are free forms. There's a form in your packet. If you've done your will and you did it a long time ago, check and see. If you had a living will, living wills are no longer in effect in Alaska. If you did one before January 1st, 2005, you're grandfathered in. But don't jump into the new form. It's so much better. You have a lot more control. So do that. We have a free form on our website. I have 2 children, as Linda mentioned. When my son graduated from high school and now my daughter, I sat them down and said, you can't afford to pay me as your lawyer, but I'm talking to you now as your lawyer. You're not going away to college, and you're not doing another thing until you have a health care directive and until you have a power of attorney. I don't care who you name, but you're going to do it. Because the very famous case, the Terry Chavo case, woman in Florida, you all remember the facts. It's her family fighting with her husband, her mom and dad fighting with her husband. She had her major health care incident when she was in her mid-20s. She wasn't in her 80s, she was in her 20s. And that caused her to be in the vegetative state she was in her 40s. There was millions of dollars in legal fees spent in that case. It's fascinating to read the procedural history. Do yourself a favor. Save yourself a lot of legal fees. Get a health care directive, and everybody you love and know, if they're 18 or older, you can have a health care directive. Plain and simple. So you want to do that. The accompanying document to that is a financial durable power of attorney who's going to take care of your money and your stuff. If something happens to you, you want to make sure you have that. So I've only gone a little bit over, but there you have it. That's what I have in those roughly 35 minutes. Thank you for ceding me your time, my co-presenters. And of course, if you have questions for Don, Linda, or I, they'll stand up and join me. So feel free to fire away.
Some people may have obligations at 8 o'clock, so please feel free to go if you want to. But does anyone have any questions? We've got 3 people here who are willing to give you a stab. Yeah.
I've got a question. I would like to have a good financial advisor that will treat me, not push anything on me. I mean, I don't want someone who wants to push me their life insurance or their stocks and bonds, but someone who can take an honest look at my situation and say, yes, you're working in the right direction, but I would suggest this and this. Yes.
So, well, that puts me on the hot seat. Why I say this, I suggest that you call several people and interview them. Doesn't cost anything to go meet somebody. Go call a couple people and see, is their style, are you comfortable with their style?
Right.
Do they try to sell you something? Do they ask you questions? Are they concerned about you? Do they deal with you as a unique individual? And what I would do is I would pick 3 people, get some references from your friends. I would take 3 people and interview them. And then say, who do I feel most comfortable with?
And there are arrangements, if I can just jump in there, Linda. You can hire people and say, I want to pay you hourly. I don't want, and it can be financial planners and make sure they know that. But go in knowing you're going to pay them. Everybody has bills to pay and a life, and that's why, of course, people, they make money, that's their living, selling insurance or financial products. If you are not interested in that, then go in with, I want your advice, but I want to pay you. And the other thing is, I think a CPA is a good place to start too. There's a team. When we do planning, I work often with Linda, I work with my clients' accountants. It's a sort of a team approach, so we're not working a couple ends against the middle.
Thank you.
There's a question.
Yes.
So, no minor children. Start there. How do you decide between instigating a trust while you're alive versus one that takes effect after you pass? What are the key elements?
The key elements are, I think, as I mentioned, one, where do you own real property? The second is how complex is your estate? What kind of people are you as far as keeping up with your homework? And what I mean by that is there's nothing worse as a lawyer when someone dies, they have a living trust, but they didn't fund it properly. And sometimes people just don't keep up with that kind of stuff. So I work with my clients and ask those kind of hard questions. What's the status of the family as far as illness? What's the status of the family regarding relationships? Are we anticipating a problem with, great Uncle Harry and niece and nephew, that kind of stuff?
Other questions? Yes.
I'm very young, but I did have a question about the healthcare directive that you talked about. So I'm almost 26. I'm single. So if I was to have one, I would name my mother. But how easy is it to change that? Like at some point, I will probably get married, and I would want to switch that over.
Extremely easy. You can access them online, and all you have to do, I'm a big fan of destruction. Find the original and destroy it. And you can also revoke a power of attorney either by doing a new one or a healthcare directive by doing a new one saying I revoke all previous ones. It's very easy, very cheap. You don't need a lawyer to do it, frankly.
And if you've given it to the hospital or to your clinic or doctor, make sure that they have a copy of the newest one.
Yeah, do one. It's so easy to change. And I always worry about naming somebody older just because the reality is they're more likely to have health care incidents themselves. But for you sitting in this room, if you have elderly parents, man, it's important to have that conversation. Because I can't tell you how many times I've gone to the hospital. I'm sure the hospital's been in this situation. There are people who are Denali Center, people are coming in, they don't have a health care directive, and they're in some sort of health care crisis. And who are we going to name? Do they have capacity? Ugly issues. So if you, for yourself and for your elders, it's important to have.
And make sure it's done properly so that it is notarized properly or witnessed properly, because sometimes they do come in and they've been getting by with it improperly, and then suddenly Medicaid or companies or investments or retirements do not want to recognize the durable power of attorney because it wasn't filled out properly.
That's exactly right. Good point, Don.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious about if you're a couple and one person is in long-term, facility or something, and you use up all your resources paying for this, how does this work between the couple? Do you use up all of the couple's money before, something will start taking over?
That's a difficult one, isn't it, Joe?
How much time do you have?
And Medicaid, like if the person is being funded through like public assistance through a spouse, they're going to hold harmless certain things and not really make the spouse impoverished. However, at death, they are going to look to see how they can reimburse those Medicaid funds that were spent. And so if as a couple you own property, Medicaid may be looking at, your children aren't just going to automatically get that. They're going to want to get reimbursed some of the cost of whatever they've been spending through the years, however long that's been.
So is there a way to protect yourself?
There are.
Well, there are some ways, and the best way to do it is to do something called Medicaid Planning. And that usually you would involve some of the experts that we have up here. The other thing I would say is that Medicaid planning is a moving target. It's always changing.
Yes.
And it's always getting tighter. At one point in time, the state of Alaska didn't take and didn't lien against your home. They let the person keep their home. Now they're supposed to lien. So if you're on Medicaid and your spouse is living in your home, then they will lien against the home, and when you die, they can take the home.
That's a whole topic that you could do several hours on. I mean, it's complex.
Patty, we had one person over here first. Yes.
I was just wondering, she had asked the question about a durable power of attorney to their mother. I thought it was possible to put several people on there, like if your mother and your sister or something like this.
You can. I like to name alternates. Let's be very clear about that. I cannot stand. I advise always against co-attorney facts because they have to agree. And that's often not possible. It sets up the Terry Chavez situation beautifully because if they don't agree, you haven't really accomplished anything. I'm kind of a big fan of the buck stops with one person who's going to be. But you can certainly name person A, and if that person's deceased or incapable, you can name an alternate and a second alternate, and we do that. But co's are bad.
But you could name a sibling or aunt
You
or
bet.
something.
Is an alternate.
Patty?
I've read some Susie Orman book.
Who loves Revocable Trust.
Yes, that's right. You haven't mentioned that at all.
Well, that's because, Susan and I don't necessarily agree on everything. I know she's a big push to that, Revocable Living Trust or Revocable Living Trust. And in the right situation, it's right. But what people hear her say is you need one, but what they do not hear her say is it has to be properly funded, and jumping back to the question over there, it has to be properly maintained. And I have seen more revocable living trusts fail than succeed because people don't do their homework, they set one up and they forget about it, and then they buy the property in Florida or they buy the condo in Arizona, and then they don't put it in there properly, and then we have to do a probate anyway. So it's not the be-all, end-all solution to every family, and probate in Alaska is not that expensive. So depending on what you have, and it costs more to set up a revocable trust. And while I'm happy to earn that money, I don't believe it's the be-all, end-all solution for everything, because probate in some situations is actually a good thing because you get creditor protection. I mean, that's a whole other topic. But so I like, it's like, it's kind of like the state of healthcare. Can you call a 1-800 number and get your diagnosis, or would you rather go believe the doctor who's going to see you? The one-size-fits-all plan doesn't work. As far as I'm concerned, I need to know what you've got and what your goals are.
Yes.
So I heard there's something you have to do, otherwise the federal or state just take your property, take your money. I never heard you mention this one.
Well, that's because it happens so rarely. The laws of intestacy actually make sure that if you leave a spouse or children or heirs, it's actually very hard for property to escheat to the state of Alaska. I've never seen it happen. In 27 years of being a lawyer, thousands of probates I've done. Because the law provides first for your family, depending on who you leave. The law writes you a will. The question is, do you like what they've done? And so it is very rare for property to escheat to the state of Alaska. Like I said, I've never seen it happen.
So the people doing those trusts, those things, is because they said can prevent the state will do it.
Well, if they can avoid it, in some trusts, you can do it for tax avoidance, you can do it for probate avoidance. There's other reasons. But if you're worried about the state of Alaska becoming owner of your property, that's not a good reason. It's very, 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 very rare.
Right. And we had a question back here. Yes.
You talked about durable power of attorney and naming more than one person. This person, if they're deceased or incapacitated. Can someone decline
Yes.
wanting the power of attorney?
You want to answer that one, Don?
It is built into the power of attorney that someone may be unwilling to perform that duty. And so simply they just wouldn't have to do it. And if they do, then if there is another alternate, then it would go to that alternate, or else it just becomes an invalid paper.
Right, it's incomplete. So, I mean, it's important to talk to people to make sure they're willing, or you just risk missing your chance to name somebody who is willing.
I guess we should also mention in that sometimes someone becomes incapacitated, or for some reason during the course of time, someone else, like maybe another sibling or a child, has actually petitioned the court for guardianship. Well, guardianship will supersede that power of attorney. It'll no longer become in effect. So someone may actually have named someone, but now the person who is the legal guardian has the true authority and power to make all the decisions.
And guardianship, that's a whole other bubble to talk about.
Yes.
You can avoid guardianship if you do a power of attorney and you choose wisely the people who are going to act for you.
Question? Yes.
Situation where a trustee becomes incapacitated prior to executing the terms of trust, and I'll put it in simple terms of there's a trust for a beneficiary. If the trustee becomes incapacitated before the beneficiary comes of age, what happens, especially if there's not another trustee or an evolution?
You want to handle that?
You go ahead. Yeah.
You can, if depends on the nature of the trust. If it's a revocable trust and the trustor, the person who set it up, is still alive, they can change it and they can name somebody else. If it is an irrevocable trust, and if that person if the person who's the named trustee cannot act, then the alternate can take over, the successor trustee can take over. If the alternate is unwilling to give up their authority and is malfeasing in their handling, then the beneficiaries would need to bring a court action to do it. So again, a lot depends on what kind of trust we're talking about in the situation.
Yeah, pretty straight irrevocable trust. I was looking at a situation where I'm a trustee for a young person and it's based on his age. Take possession. If the person died, what happens?
If you died before, there is hopeful that there's an alternate named. There's a successor trustee named so that person could take over for you. But if you were unwilling and you knew now you didn't want to serve, I would encourage you to talk to the person who's named you to make sure that they name someone else.
The other thing, too, is frequently you can say, I asked this person to serve as my personal representative. Then you can name an alternate. You can name another alternate. And then also, you can also name a trust company. And generally, a trust company doesn't disappear or dissolve or die. And that trust company can accept that responsibility, too. So although it's a last resort, that is an option. You have a question here?
Okay. We had two wills. We had the will when we had minor children. And then when the children weren't minors anymore, we changed the will. And now we're looking at going into retirement, which is telling me that we need to. Either one of the will ones, they never talked to us about all this tax information, which is telling me I probably am going to the wrong person to get my will done, which is why I'm asking.
Do you see me biting my lip?
Seriously, either time that was never mentioned. And we have an accountant, and we didn't think to ask him we figured we had a legal person, but they never talked to each other.
It is absolutely, as a lawyer, malpractice if I do not ask you the size of your estate and you die and there is a resulting estate tax. I, as a lawyer, and that's where so many people think, I can't tell you how many times I've had a client come in and say to me, I need a simple will. I don't have anything. I need a simple will. And I'm like, well, thank you for telling me that, but how about let's talk about that a little bit and let's just make sure that that's the case. Now, since the law change, more people do not have an estate tax problem than used to. Let's just say that up front. The law on the income tax side has done some pretty horrendous things to taxpayers on the income tax side. But on the estate tax side, the new law has been remarkably helpful. That's the fact. But I, as a lawyer, must ask you, I have got to know your citizenship. I have got to know what you've got. And that's often really hard for people, right? They've just met me, and I'm like, well, let's tell me about everything you own, right? You just met me, but I want to know everything about you. I want to know where your bank accounts are, and I want to know where your real estate is. And I once presented with somebody somebody who said it's kind of like going to the doctor and being unwilling to take off your clothes. That's a pretty graphic image, I might say, but it's the truth. If you're not willing to share with me what you have, I can't do a good job for you, and I'm not willing to take on that liability.
But if I was going to switch to a different lawyer, so I would just bring my current will that we have and just say, like, it would be as if we were starting off brand new again with a brand new will.
And it may be that your will's fine. Let me just say that. Once I go through the analysis and I see what you have and look at it, there's oftentimes I go, you're fine because you don't have an estate tax problem. Or here's something you might want to look at. It's next to impossible for me to amend a will that already exists. I'm one to say, I'm starting over, unless it's fine.
But, well, our main concern was the children. But now, as we're getting older, it's like, from this, it's like, well, we need to get a reality check here for, this is a real important one that we're getting done now for this part of it.
It's absolutely the case. And like I say, I can't speak to any other lawyer who's ever acted, but any lawyer who does a will for any client who does not ask about the size of their estate has malpracticed if that estate is bigger than $5.34 million. Plain and simple. And I'm not willing to have that liability.
And one of the biggest issues, too, is the fact that this is a bouncing ball. Right now, we have $5 million. The administration would like to change it. And, it was $600,000, then it went to $1 million, then it went to $3 million, now it's $5 million. The history of estate taxes has to do with the size of the deficit. And if you follow, it goes back to the Revolutionary War, I believe. It's starting with the revolution. Well, the estate tax comes in when the federal government needs money, goes out when it doesn't, changes all the time. I think there's, 14, 15 changes that there's been in the last couple hundred years. So what is today?
Or if it's an election year.
Oh, that's true. That's true. But what it is today may not be what it's going to be next year. So it's always important that's why you update with your attorney or you consult with your accountant so that you keep appraised of how it's changing. Are there any other questions? Yes.
So when you do your will, should you sit down with the attorney and the accountant together or you talk to them separately?
I think you could start with either. Accountants can't draft wills, plain and simple. But I think a lot of times accountants, when they see they meet with clients sometime January to April 15th, and they see this, your income tax issues. Most accountants I know say something along the lines of, do you have a will? Maybe you need to think about going to a lawyer. And so, I think it makes sense you can start either place, but certainly a lawyer is the person who can draft the will for you. Accountants don't draft wills.
But when you're talking to your accountant about income tax, you can say, would you advise us to do this?
Sure, absolutely.
And if so, what are the issues we should pay attention to?
And I don't know an accountant who wouldn't tell you yes.
Yeah.
Every accountant worth their salt will say, you need to get a will done. I mean, I've never had an accountant say, oh, no, don't bother.
I mean, it's fairly expensive to involve both your accountant and attorney together.
Yes, then you're paying about $450 for that hour.
An hour. So if you don't need to do that, there are times when we do. When I end up being in the room too, so that I'm working with the accountant, the attorney, and I'm not charging by the hour, or frequently, I never do. So what happens is I'm the cheap one. So I get a lot of time with people, and then I bring in, then people get together, but they have to pay me my time, which is just fine with me. That's just not how it works with me. But it's important to have a team, and even if your team, you don't meet with them together, they at least know who's who. Wouldn't you say, Joe?
It's absolutely true. Because, Linda may know your beneficiary designations, and I'm going to ask her, and,
And I'm going to ask Joe, what is beneficiary designation, how should we word it? And then she sends me over the wording, and then I do the beneficiary designation. So it is teamwork, but you don't necessarily all have to meet simultaneously. Keep an eye on that budget.
I just wanted to say something about financial planners, because you can go online, and there are certain places that you can go to. Financial planners are required by law to disclose any action that they've had done against them. It's required if they have certain little initials after their names. And I just found out, because we typed in a financial account, and it's like, oh, I did not know that this was a case that had been pending. But you can do that free of charge. It's like Merrill Lynch and different ones like that will have a place that you can go to, and You can type in that person's name, and it will tell you if that person has had any claims against him, any actions, whether or not the action's held up. But you can find that out free of charge. The financial planners do not have to have college degrees. All they need to do is to pass certain tests, and they're only good in certain states. But it's a good idea to do. You can do free background checks as far as their certification goes, just by typing it in Google. Just type it in, and they'll give you the free spots where you can go to. And it's amazing what you can pull up about a financial planner.
I'd like to say one thing about a financial planner, and that's that everybody's different, and what works for one person doesn't work with another. So there's no rubber stamp that says you should do this, you should do that, you shouldn't do this, because everybody's family is different, everybody's attitudes and ideas and desires are different. So whatever you do, make sure that it reflects your value system and that you feel comfortable with it. Another question? Yes.
You've talked a lot about couples. What's the big difference between a single person, no minor, no children whatsoever?
The biggest single difference with a single person is that